went all the way to the end and lost again.
Imagine that. Going all the way, giving everything you have, and still ending up with nothing. No job, no home, 5 days before Christmas, and somewhere in that house, a little girl waiting for her father to tell her everything was going to be okay. But here's what nobody talks about when they tell this story. It wasn't the first time he had lost everything. He had been here before. And every single time, he had found a way back. But this time, something was different. Because this time, he wasn't just losing a job. He wasn't just losing a home. He was starting to lose the only thing that had ever kept him going: himself. And the worst part, nobody could see it. Not even him. But this isn't just a story about a man who struggled. Those stories are everywhere. This one is different because this didn't happen when he had nothing. It happened after he already fought his way out, after the world finally decided he was worth paying attention to. And that's exactly what makes it so hard to understand. How does a man who survived the worst end up back at the bottom? And this time, with his daughter watching. The answer is going to surprise you. Before anyone knew his name, he was just a kid who never stayed anywhere long enough to call it home. New city, new school, same feeling. The outsider, the one who didn't belong. His father left when he was 18 months old, before he could even say the word Dad. And the letters he sent later, every single one came back. Returned to sender, so he learned early what abandonment felt like. And he swore he would never become that. But life has a way of testing the promises we make to ourselves. Growing up, 6 different schools in a single year, on welfare, in neighborhoods where fitting in meant surviving. But somewhere in the middle of all that, he found something. Not a solution, an escape. Words, rhymes, stories. A place where everything he couldn't control outside, he could control completely. And for the first time in his life, people stopped and listened. Not because they understood him, but because they felt him. And when you've spent your entire life being invisible, that feeling changes everything. So he held on to it, even when it didn't pay, even when nobody believed in it, because it stopped being a dream and became the only thing keeping him standing. But life doesn't wait for the right moment. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It just keeps moving. And one day, everything changed. Because someone else arrived, small, completely dependent, looking up at him with no idea what kind of world she had just been born into. His daughter, and in that moment, every dream he had ever chased suddenly meant something different, something heavier, something more real than anything he had ever felt before. Because now, it wasn't just about him anymore. Now there was someone who needed more than a dream, someone who needed a father who showed up. And he was determined to be exactly that. But what it cost him was more than he ever expected. And then it happened. Not like a crash, more like a slow leak. He was working a minimum wage job in a kitchen in Detroit, 60 hours a week, not because he wanted to, but because his daughter needed to eat. But one day, 5 days before Christmas, which was also 5 days before his daughter's birthday, he was fired. Just like that, $40 in his pocket. A little girl at home who didn't know what was happening, but could feel that something was wrong. That night, he sat down. Not because he had a plan, not because he saw a way out, but because it was the only thing he knew how to do. And what came out of that night would eventually be heard by millions of people. But we're not there yet, because before the world heard it, things got darker, much darker. And this is the part of the story that almost nobody talks about. Because even after things started moving, even after people started listening, even after the door finally opened, something else was already happening. Quietly. Invisibly. The kind of thing that doesn't announce itself. It starts small. One moment of relief in the middle of chaos. And when you've been carrying this much weight for this long, that relief feels like survival. So you go back to it again and again until one day you realize you can't stop. And the world outside is still watching the show. The records, the sold-out arenas, the accolades. But inside that house, behind those doors, a father was disappearing. And his daughter, the same little girl he had promised himself he would never abandon, was watching. Not understanding, but feeling everything. And the man who had sworn he would never become his own father was running out of time to keep that promise. And the man sitting there, at the bottom of everything, with a daughter watching, a promise breaking, and a life slipping through his fingers, wasn't just anyone. He was the same man who had once written a song on the worst night of his life and called it exactly what it was: rock bottom. That man was Marshall Mathers. The world would come to know him as Eminem. The best-selling rapper of all time. But before any of that, he was just a father, trying not to disappear, and he almost did. The addiction got worse before it got better. Days he couldn't remember, nights that blurred into mornings, and through all of it, the world kept demanding more, while Marshall was barely there at all, until one day, something shifted. Not a dramatic moment, not a single conversation, just a realization. Quiet, heavy, impossible to ignore, that the little girl who had watched him struggle when he had nothing was now watching him struggle with everything. And he was about to become the one thing he had promised himself he would never be: the man who disappeared. So he made a choice. Not because it was easy, not because he was ready, but because every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. And that was enough. Recovery wasn't clean. It wasn't fast, but he stayed with it, day after day, choice after choice. And slowly, Marshall came back. Not Slim Shady, not Eminem. Marshall, the father. And when he came back, the music came back with him. Harder, rawer, more honest than anything he had ever made before. Because now he wasn't just rapping about surviving, he was rapping from the other side of it. And the world heard the difference. And sobriety changed something he didn't expect. It wasn't just the music that came back. It was the small things, being present at the breakfast table, picking her up from school, knowing what was happening in her life. Not from a distance, but from inside it. And Hailie noticed, not because he made a speech about it, not because he announced it, but because he was simply there, day after day, in the ordinary moments that don't make headlines. And as she grew up, something became clear. She wasn't just the daughter of the most famous rapper in the world. She was the daughter of a man who chose her repeatedly, quietly, without asking for credit. And when she eventually spoke about her father, she didn't talk about the records. She didn't talk about the awards. She talked about who he was at home, the father who showed up. And for a man who grew up never knowing what that felt like, that was everything. Years later, Hailie grew up. She graduated college, built her own life, and she speaks about her father not as a legend, not as an icon, but as someone who was there, who showed up, who stayed, who chose her when everything else was pulling him away. And that is the part of this story the charts will never capture. Because Eminem's greatest record wasn't an album. It was breaking the cycle his own father started the day he walked away from an 18-month-old boy and never came back. Marshall Mathers refused to be that man, even when he was losing, even when he was disappearing, even when he had nothing left but a promise he had made to himself a long time ago. And he kept it. So if you're watching this from your own bottom, remember this. The man who once sat in that kitchen with $40, a daughter who needed him and nothing else, didn't just survive. He became the reason she never had to wonder if her father was coming back. Sometimes the place that breaks you is the same place that teaches you who you really are.